Good morning, Adam.
Hello there, Connor.
How are we getting on?
I'm not too bad now. Yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm very happy with how this episode turned out.
It was one of the most enjoyable episodes we've done so far, I must admit.
I know we say it like every time, which is probably a good sign that this is the best one yet. But I do actually believe that this is one of the best ones yet.
Yeah, like I say it on the actual episode itself, but you can tell we were joined by a veteran of podcasting.
Absolutely.
I
So
I ask him one question at the start, and he talks for 45 minutes.
it's like he predicted our questions
Yeah.
and we were just nodding away and saying, yeah,
It's unfortunate I closed the notepad I had open, but like the first question we asked was, how did you get into lifting weights? Like, the most general, like what's your origin story, so to speak.
yeah.
And the next few questions were then like more specific, like tell us more about your bodybuilding bodybuilding career, because a lot of people don't know that he did that,
Mm.
and I guess we did. And then like more about your powerlifting and more about your academics, and he just knocked those out.
Amazing.
It was great. It
The
was great.
it's like perfect that you said his origin story, given the whole comic book character aura he has around him.
True. And you know what? Actually, there was way more to that than I expected. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
th- I thought, he's just playing, doing a bit of a meme. But no, like he actually was doing that because it helped him get into a better spot, like a spot where he could perform,
Hmm.
better, more consistently,
It's
which
like
was really cool.
his alter ego. I suppose
Yeah.
we'd actually say who it is, but anyone who's clicked onto the episode knows that today we were joined by Arthur Lynch,
Yep. Of
super influential person in the Irish PF. One of the people I could confidently say is responsible for the success that it has seen, and recently awarded his PhD. So he's now Dr. Arthur Lynch, comma
PhD.
PhD. Super interesting guy. Absolutely great chat. We kind of, as Adam said there, we go through his origin story, his athletic career, and how that influenced his career and academic choices as a researcher. And then it was actually a really nice opportunity to talk about some of the research that he has done. And we got a nice opportunity to talk shit about Squat University, which I always enjoy. And I think that was in relation to research on unilateral exercises and imbalances. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, that was a really interesting conversation. I must take up with him another time. I think that about
I,
covers it, is it?
I think it does. Yeah. Like it's for me and you. We were both saying this as we were sitting there listening to him talk. He was very concerned about it not being interesting, but I was having a fantastic time,
Yeah.
just chilling out and listening to a dude talk about his expertise. Like there's no other way of saying it.
Mm.
And yeah, it was really enjoyable. As we say in the podcast itself, we definitely plan on having Arthur on again, because we had a few other questions and a few other kind of lines we wanted to go down, and the podcast is nearly 2 hours long, so we didn't. But yeah, I think the next one has potential to be fantastic as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm excited to hear what you people think of it. Enjoy the show. Arthur Lynch, everybody. Arthur, why don't you say hello?
Hello. Good afternoon.
So, for anyone who does not know Arthur, Arthur is the host of the No Lift podcast and various other things that we'll get into during the podcast. But yeah, one quick story to start us off. So, my first competition, Arthur, I don't know if you know this, but I actually shared a flight with you at my very first competition.
Oh no, what did I
In
do? I'm so
No,
sorry.
nothing actually. You were just quite impressive. I think, what did you squat? It was like 230 or something. Um, which was amazing. Obviously, Barry was in the same flight, so not that amazing, but still amazing. Um, it was it was 6 or 7 years ago. It was in RD. It was in Louth,
I know it.
IDFBA.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So that's when I first was exposed to you and immediately clocked the Wolverine thing.
So
Um,
sorry to cut across, it's also a terrific demonstration in how not to pick your attempts. It was like it was classical of our mindset back then, or at least mine was like, it's like, okay, I want to hit a PR today, so I'll go for it on my second, so that if I miss it, I'll have another opportunity.
That is pretty typical of the time. I think Barry bombed out on bench that day. I think it was. I think because of a similar attitude towards attempt selection.
Yeah, I don't know as well about how he managed his cut. And actually, we were hanging around that morning of, and I remember after we weighed in, like he didn't have he barely had like a banana, I think, and that was because I was stuffing my face watching him. I was like, "You sure you're not hungry, man?" He's like, "No, not really." So I don't know. I was like, oh, maybe that's just Barry, but he didn't go on to have a great day afterwards. So I don't know, just putting two and two together there. I would suspect that he wasn't feeling great going into it.
Yeah, the weight cut could have been to blame. Um, so yeah, that was my first meet in, was it 2014? Was that comp?
15.
2015.
Yeah.
That comp was. And Connor's gone. Hopefully he'll be back. So yeah, that very nicely leads me into your origin story. How did you, before powerlifting even? How did you get into lifting weights? What's the Arthur Lynch story, so to speak?
How extensive do you want this to be?
Very, extremely.
Okay, right. Okay, so how I got into lifting weights was fairly uninteresting. As a teenager, I played rugby for many years, as is not uncommon. And then end of fifth year, my rugby club, we'd enrolled in a strength and conditioning program that was going to take place over the summer. And I know obviously there's people listening and be like, well, strength and conditioning isn't just for the off season, but like, look, lads, it was 2009. It was a miracle that we were even that was even considered at that stage. And so, yeah, enrolled in that, and basically from the night where we got the introduction to like, okay, this is nutrition, this is training, and these are how you do different exercises. That night, it's not an understatement to say. Sorry, it's not an overstatement to say that changed the course of my life, because from then on I was pretty much hooked on the whole training and nutrition thing, and it just snowballed from there. Then leaving cert year, I was still playing rugby, but as the year was going on, I was kind of falling out of love with rugby and falling in love with the whole process around training, and I just found it absolutely fascinating because I was seeing some very profound changes in body composition around that time as well, as I was combining the nutrition stuff with what I was doing in the gym. Of course, I had no idea what I was doing in the grand scheme of things, but no one does at that stage. Um, and yeah, then I was like, well, this is like the only thing I care about right now. This is the only thing I'm interested in. And yeah, spending my spare time looking at online articles and YouTube videos and stuff on like how to get a six pack and how
I
to
was gonna ask.
how to build your biceps peak and this kind of thing. And of those of those early kind of YouTubers, I think your man Scooby is still knocking around. So he was new to YouTube when I was starting off, and so then yeah, so then the reason that's important is because that's when I kind of said, right, I would like to pursue this in an academic sense. This is the thing that I'm interested in. So what course can I do that most closely aligns with learning about training and nutrition? And that brought me to sport and exercise sciences in the University of Limerick. So I enrolled in that, got in, and because I really wanted to train in the UL gym, because of course that's where we did the strength and conditioning program the summer beforehand. And I was like, that's an amazing gym. I want to go back and train there. And so I did that, and I got in, doing sports science and then training and all that alongside it. By this point, I packed in rugby, so I was exclusively a guy who just recreationally lifted weights. And so I did that then for a couple of years, and then at one point I had this idea in my head about doing a bodybuilding show. And I guess that was partly motivated by, it's really laughable kind of looking back, but as a young lad in school, I wasn't fat, but I was certainly a lot flabbier and a lot chunkier than my peers. So at times I might have been a bit self-conscious about that, and I was definitely teased a few times about it. So that probably carried through to when I decided that maybe I'd like to do a bodybuilding show, because that would be like, in my head, that would be like a massive middle finger to those guys, as if to say, well, yeah, I was fat, but now I'm shredded as fuck. Sorry, can I curse on this?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, grand, okay, thank fuck. So did that anyway, and that was a hilarious experience, because at the time there was no drug-tested bodybuilding federation in Ireland. And I'm sure there's someone already listening thinking, oh my God, he's not natural. If you find the clips of me competing at the RIBBF Junior Championships in 2012, if you look at the lineup and then tell me I'm not natural, good luck to you. But I got very lean for it, but I mean, I was completely hamstrung by the fact that I was entering in the junior division. So that was under 23. So I had probably an inexperience. I was conceding, experience-wise to the other competitors, but it was also an open weight class. So like, there's no limit on the stage weights. So if you can imagine, like me, drug-free, I think I stepped on stage at 73 kilos, and there were lads on stage with me at a similar height, 90 kilos, and lean. So that'll kind of put it in perspective for you.
I suppose this was before kind of the broad short bodybuilding, right? I don't know what that's called, but it was kind of before there was
men's physique.
Yeah.
It was, I think it was around the time when that was starting to gather momentum. We didn't have it in Ireland, to the best of my knowledge, at the time. So yeah, that's a good point. Is like, there literally there wasn't really any other avenues. I mean, I could have gone into the novice division where there were fewer competitors, but they would have been older. So you've always the chance of like a guy who's been training a decade but just never decided to compete, and he hops in and he's amazing right away. That does happen. And I was just advised to go into the junior category, so I did. But it was fine. I had great fun, and the whole experience was fantastic. So I decided, right, well, this is my thing now. So I wanted to do another show as soon as I could. So I had it in my head that I'd do another one 12 months later. And I managed that whole year very, very poorly. I gained way too much weight in the off season, gained a lot of strength and a lot of muscle. So at the time I was like, well, this is fantastic. I'm doing this really well. But I gained way too much weight, and then gave myself too much to do when it came to cutting down for the show. Not only that, but this was also, 2013, so this was around the time when high intensity interval training was all the rage.
Mm-hmm.
So I was convinced that the modality that I had used the previous year to get lean, which was fasted morning walks, was dumb. Fasting, like, it's not going to increase your fat loss relative to not fasting. But that probably wasn't why it was effective for me. Why it was effective was because I don't habitually walk a lot, so it was quite helpful for losing fat in that sense, because it increased my energy expenditure and the recovery demand was very low. So I mean, you're just going for a walk. So I mean, I'd walk all around Castletroy every morning, headphones in and just power walk in the morning, and then come back in, have my breakfast, go do my day's work, and then um, that was very effective. But then, of course, 2013, I had decided, well, I'm not going to use that approach this year. I'm going to do HIIT sessions instead. Not only that, but this was also around the time when higher frequency training for your strength training was being advocated in the interwebs. So what I managed to pigeonhole myself into a position where I was squatting twice a week, I was deadlifting once a week, and I was doing high intensity, like basically Wingate sessions 3 times a week. Are you familiar with what a Wingate is?
Not that term, no.
So a Wingate would be, so you hop on a stationary bike, you do a 5 minute warm up, and then you start pedaling as fast as you can whilst jacking up the resistance to the maximum.
Okay.
And you can do it for 10 to 30 seconds. Of course, I went with the let's do the 30-second protocol because I was an idiot and was like, well, that's harder, so it's got to be better. So do that. You're pedaling as hard as you can against maximal resistance for 30 seconds for 4 to 6 sprints. So it's effectively doing 4 to 6 all-out sprint attempts.
Okay.
So I was doing that to get lean. As you can imagine, my knees did not like me after a few weeks. But of course, when you're young and dumb and full of something else, you'll plow through it. And I just had it in my head that I was like, no, I got this show coming up. I have to power through. Backing off is not an option. So that obviously didn't end well, and it's the reason why my knees still give me trouble nowadays. Anyway, so then dealing with that injury, and also coming into the show, I knew I wasn't going to look as good as I did the previous year, because I still needed about another 6 weeks to get as lean as I was the year before. And then the issues that I was having with my knees was affecting my training. So it's hard to know if, like, looking at the photos, it probably was a little bit bigger than the year before, but ultimately it wasn't as lean. And at this point, I had gone into a natural federation, which had been created that year. So on the whole, the overall package wasn't as good. And particularly with the natural federations, they're more inclined to favor leanness. Like usually the guy who wins is the guy who's the most ripped, not necessarily the guy who's the biggest. Mm-hmm. So the whole experience was just, it wasn't as satisfying for me. And at that point I was like, right, I need to take a break from this. So I went back to just being a guy who lifted weights for a while. And then I had dabbled with things that aren't powerlifting, but are like powerlifting, in the sense that I did some, you remember, like the single lift events in the IDFPA.
Yeah.
Like it's not powerlifting, but it's similar. So it gave me a taste of it. I was like, I enjoy this. This is nice. So did a couple of deadlift only comps and bench only comps, which were a lot of fun. And the one thing you could say about them is that, particularly around that time, like you could be all day at a meet, but those single lift competitions, usually out of there pretty quickly. So it was a nice experience. Mm-hmm. And so then eventually I was just like, right, I guess I'm a powerlifter now. So signed up for a full meet, and it did that. The first one was in 2014 in the Mardyke in Cork. First time meeting Barry Piggott and Adam Keane and Dan Hurley and Ken Wezagwe as well. There's a few others as well that I met that day for the first time, and
Did Ken compete at that meet?
he did, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
amazing! Didn't know that.
So and I did all right at that meet, even though it didn't do so good with regards to the attempt selection. And funny story as well. So you know this the whole thing about like if you dump a bar in a squat, you know it's the last thing you'll do on a platform. Rob's famous line. I did that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Because
What kind of was it like? Barry at Nationals last year, kind of thing, or did you
no,
just?
it was like have you ever seen like a weightlifter fail a squat?
Oh Jesus Christ!
Yeah,
To varying severities, like it. Did
as
it
in
just crumple? Like, did you just crumple under the
no, as in
bar?
dump it behind me.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was a dick move, but I guess I knew no better. So, and I was used to doing that in training because I'd never trained around spotters, and often I would squat on the Olympic platforms with the bumper plates, so it was fair game. Um, so I did that. I also had a shitty bodybuilding belt, and funnily enough, when I asked um, I guess the committee members, I was like, is it okay to use this? And they're like, you can use it, but your lifts won't be counted. I was like, right, well, you mean I can't fucking use it then? so, which I found bizarre because I held this very lightweight bodybuilding belt up against like a proper powerlifting belt. And I'm like, are you trying to tell me that I'm getting an unfair advantage by using this? Because I don't think that's true. But however, I think the issue was the little bit of padding inside of it, but whatever. So I borrowed a belt and I used that for deadlifts. So overall, it was a very nice experience. And I guess I'm inclined to like if I find something and I like it, I tend to go head first into it. And that's very much what happened with powerlifting. And then the coaching thing sort of snowballed alongside that as well, because that was shortly after when City Gym had been established. And amazingly enough, there wasn't much of a demand for a powerlifting club for men at the time. A lot of the powerlifters in Limerick at the time were fairly insular and sort of just doing their own thing, either in one of the other powerlifting gyms, and particularly the untested lifters, or sort of scattered around commercial gyms, and they couldn't really be convinced to go and train elsewhere at the time. But there was a big demand for a ladies powerlifting club, so we set up the Limerick Ladies Drug-Free Powerlifting Club in what was that, late 2014. And looking back on that, it's a bit weird because we had a huge turnover of lifters. We definitely made some mistakes with regards to coaching and stuff, but it just seemed to be they seemed to treat it like, I don't know, like, let's just try this for 3 months and then just pack it in straight afterwards. It was weird. We don't seem to have that anymore. Like, people tend to come in and if they like it, they stay. Of course, people come and go, but anyway, I'm rambling now, so I'm going to move on. So then, 2015, we had the IPF set up and did the first meet there above in Belfast. I was very impressed by that, considering it was the first meet for the Federation, but I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was in Belfast and you had the NIPF influence as well, so that helped quite a bit. And I could kind of see the writing was on the wall in the sense that the IPF were just holding better meets. So, and I had wanted to hold a meet in Limerick for quite a while, and I had expressed interest to the committee members of the IDFPA, and then sort of got some lukewarm responses, and then got okay, we'll definitely have a meet in Limerick now. I think it was the InterVarsities 2015. They said, we'll have that in Limerick. All of a sudden, then it gets announced for Setanta College in Thurles. which was great for me because I have family in Thurles. So I was one of the very few people who could actually overnight in Thurles because there's like one hotel in the whole town. And I enjoyed that. But at the same time, I was like, well, you told me we were going to have it in UL, and UL is much better equipped to host a meet than Setanta College. So I was just like, I'm not sure about these guys. And then I proposed hosting a meet to the IPF then for 2016. Eventually, we ended up having nationals down there, and like you have to place it in the context of like where we were at with the IPF, where certainly where I was at in terms of hosting meets, because I know I've got an awful lot better at this. Some people look back on that meet and laugh as like a, God, that was so shit. That was so shit. But I think you have to put it in the context of like it was about the third IPF meet and the first nationals. And there was always going to be some teething problems there. So we did our best under the circumstances, I feel. So then that went well. That meet was for me a very good meet because it actually was enough to qualify me to get to Worlds in Killeen, which was just a fantastic experience, and I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity to go there. There's something about being part of the first team in this new iteration of the IPF to go to a classic Worlds, and that was incredible. And of course, I spent a lot of it like being like an idiot fanboy, asking for photos with different powerlifters, and just like you look back on it afterwards, you're like, they're not sports stars or celebrities that are used to people coming up to them and asking for photos and stuff. It's it's just weird, but nonetheless, I had a great time. Then, yeah, 2017 was probably my best year in powerlifting. It was the first time we held a meet in City Gym. That's a funny story if you want to know more about it, but
definitely.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, so late 2016 we had decided on the 2017 calendar, and they were like, right, we want to have a meet in Limerick. So I was like, right, well, where could we hold this that's close enough to City Gym? Because at the time I was like, nah, City Gym's way too small. There is absolutely no way. It would be unsafe. We couldn't host a meeting there. Absolutely not. So so then I'd sussed out a school hall, which was only like basically across the road from us, and had been in contact with a guy who was sort of the guy that you liaise with to, rent out the hall or what have you. And so it was all kind of agreed upon, and he'd sent me the paperwork and all the insurance, and that was taken care of. And then all of a sudden, shit really hit the fan, because it turned out that guy was a very shady individual who had been pocketing hundreds and hundreds of euros that he shouldn't have been. And so he was ousted. And then there was like a new committee in the school or whatever, and the whole thing just became, it was far more hassle than it was worth. So I was looking at other schools and different other potential venues that might have been able to host this competition, and none of them were really suitable, because there was always the concern around, like, someone is warming up for their deadlifts, and you know how it is, like you're just like you want to feel confident going onto the platform, so you might just do your last warm up and then just slam it down onto the floor afterwards. I mean, you can be fairly sure that like the competition platform is probably going to be okay, but the warm up sometimes it can be a different story. So there was a concern around like doing damage to the floors and stuff like that. Eventually, Gar just kind of said to me, like, Arthur, man, like, do you think we could host it here? And so I was like, I don't know, man, but it's looking like we might have to. And so then I said it to Rob, and I was like, look, the place is small, but we'll make every effort that we can to ensure that it's as safe as possible. We'll take as much stuff out of it as we can, and just do all we can all weekend to ensure that it runs well. And he's like, Arthur, I trust you. He mightn't have said those words exactly, but more or less, he's like, I'm cool. You guys, you know what you're doing. So then I chatted with my friend Chris, who is really the driving force behind a lot of the city gym meets and why they've been so successful. Is he's a sort of a freelance events management guy. it's sort of a side project for him. The guy's addicted to work. He has a full-time job and then does this on top of it. So I said to him, do you think we could host a meet here? And he laughed and he was like, yeah, of course you can. I've set up CrossFit competitions in spaces smaller than this, and you know how chaotic CrossFit is. And I was like, yeah, you're right there. So long story short, we managed to set it up. It was an enormous, like a monumental effort on the part of Chris, myself, Stephen, Gar, Donica, if you remember him, he helped out, and the other coaches, and then I'm just so afraid that I'm not going to mention someone who was really important, so I've probably dug an awful hole for myself there. But like a monumental effort on the part of the entire City Gym community to set the place up. So if you've ever been to City Gym, on a normal day, you'll see how kitted out it is and all the stuff that's on the ground floor. We to basically take everything that wasn't a plate or a barbell or a rubber mat or an ER rack out of there and either throw it upstairs or throw it into the garage next door. Oh man, that was torture. That was
It's a big
awful. Because we had to dismantle a lot of stuff, and then some stuff is just so heavy and awkward, and but we managed it. We pulled a drape across the front of the rig. We built the competition platform that week, so I managed to secure some offcuts of a rubber flooring that had been used for the gym in the UL Arena, and that laid the foundation of the competition platform. We put some boards on top of it, and then I got a carpet as well. I brought it out from the carpet store in my little Renault Clio, and I mean, that guy just must have thought I was insane, but whatever. Brought that in, built it like the night before, so it all went fine. But it was the kind of thing where, like, if this didn't work out, we're fucked. You know what I mean? Then a metal frame around the outside of it. So built that, and it actually looked grand before it got caked in all sorts of white powder. Then set up the Alico rack, put up the competition banner, set up the warm-up room, and then meet went on grand. Everything ran pretty well. There were some teething problems, as there's always going to be when you do a thing like this for the first time, but generally the feedback was very, very positive. And like, something I tried to do is not to try and reinvent the wheel, but every time we have a new meet, just try and improve on the last one a little bit. So it might be something simple, like instead of having like, we had no chalk bowl, I think, the first time. So it was like no, we had a chalk bowl just immediately off the platform, but none in the warm-up area. And it's a little awkward walking around and stuff. So I was like, all right, next time I'll put one in the back room. I'll get another deadlift jack. Or in recent years, we rented screens so that we could do away with the kind of projector and the projector and screen instead of, so we TV screens now. And that saved a lot of space, which, if you've been to City Gym, is an important consideration. The only downside to that weekend of that first meet was it absolutely ruined me. And again, coming back to some of my stubbornness that I talked about from the bodybuilding days. Of course, I was meant to be squatting heavy the Monday night after the meet, and like an idiot, persisted. And then that was the genesis of the issues I've been having with my back pretty much ever since. That was when like that training session, like something didn't feel right, but it was kind of one of those things where, it's kind of sore, but if I brace really hard, I can get through it. So I did another, whatever, 3 or 4 sets, and then next day couldn't get out of bed. So I was like, oh fuck. But I recovered pretty quickly, and I was probably back to 95% about 2 weeks later. Part of the reason why I didn't back off was because I had to meet myself like in 3 weeks from that training session. So I recovered, did the meet, and then I was fine for most of 2017 actually. And as I was saying, that was probably my best year. We had the meet in Belfast, which Jack talked about on the episode he did with you a few weeks ago, and he said that it was probably his favorite competition. It's definitely my favorite competition being a part of, because it was just a fantastic spectacle. I mean, I love the fact that they were telling us that we needed to turn the music down because we were drowning out the sound of all the other events. Like, no one was looking at the strongman competition beside us, or did you know there was a bodybuilding show on there? Like, I didn't see anyone on like watching that, or anyone on stage. And it was also the best of the Irish Muscle Power Expos. Like, they had good stalls. Like, they had protein ice cream that was actually really tasty. Like, mobile coffee vans. The apparel stands were nice, and yeah, it was just between that, and then you had Gino, and I was in a really confident position where I was at with everything. And I had come off the back of a good meet in Belarus, and everything was just going really well. So that day was, that was really, really special. A couple of kids came up to me afterwards as well and asked for a photo and an autograph, which was really fucking weird. I was like, no, you shouldn't be looking up to me, kids. Find a better hero. And then did another meet then later that year, matched my total. It was all right. It was fine. There's a video of like a deadlift that takes me about 10 seconds to lock out, but and I loved it, and it was great at the time, but like looking back, I probably don't think I should have got the lift, but it was fantastic at the time. And look, I've had decisions go the other way as well, so take the rub of the green when you get it. That's sport. So then what are we on to then? 2018 went to Calgary, the Irish team. I was starting to get some issues with my back around that time as well. And what was funny about that meet was when we got onto deadlifts, I was like, I'm in trouble here. And so I said to the lads, will you drop my opener 5 kilos? So I did that. So I was like, all right, opening, whatever it was 280. So that's fine. So then go up to do my last warm up at 250, and it doesn't budge. And then I was like, oh, we're in quite a spot of bother here. Because as you know, you can only change your opener once. So I somehow managed it. I picked the thing up off the floor and put it down.
What was the opener?
I think, it was 285, I think. Look, I have no idea how I managed to lift it. And I was in discomfort before and after it. The only position that was comfortable was like standing and walking around. If you sat down, because you'd sit down between attempts and stuff like that, and my back would just stiffen up and get sore. So I was like, right, I'm just gonna stay on my feet the entire time. I pulled the opener and I was like, right, I'm done, lads. Put 290 on it there so that LS has an extra minute, you know, for his next attempt, because I kind of wanted him to win. And he came up afterwards and thanked me for doing that. So at least some good came out of my misfortune. But yeah, and then just dealing with some back issues kind of on and off since then. I, funnily enough, had another meet later on that year, and if anyone who's been listening doesn't think I'm absolutely fucking insane at this point, they will when they hear this story. So I entered that competition under a pseudonym, which was James Howlett, because I just, so something that really annoys me is when people ask me, yeah, no, it's ridiculous, but when people ask me, you know, any competitions coming up or when's the next competition, like, people will barely say hello to me and ask me about it. I've had someone ask me as I'm warming up during a meet, when's the next competition?
like sometime soon, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, look, I don't know, maybe in 5 minutes. You know? And then just a combination of factors, and you know, it used to give me paranoia seeing my name on the list, and it's like others will see my name there now and this kind of thing. So I was just like as a joke, I'll enter as James Howlett, and I was sort of 50-50 as to whether I was going to do the meet, and that gave me an out as well, because it's like, well, if James Howlett pulls out, no one knows who that is. So I'll do that and see how it goes. Turns out it was the best meet of my life. and yeah, and then since then it's just been various degrees of regression from there. But the Wolverine thing then, like, that was kind of strange, because as a kid, like, Wolverine was like my favorite kind of cartoon character. I was never into comics, but I used to watch the X-Men cartoons and things like that, and the X-Men movies came out, and Wolverine was always my favorite character. And then I remember in 2011, the first time that I'd let my hair get out of hand, someone said to me, "Oh, you look like Hugh Jackman," and I was like, "Oh, very nice, very nice. I'll roll with that." And then I don't know, like, Screamer Manual talks about this. Like, when he was first squatting 180, there was a certain amount of noise, which was intensified when he started squatting 220, and that increased again when he was squatting 250, all the way up to like 331, like when he was at his peak level of decibels. It was something similar to that. It was just like a combination of nerves and like wanting to just distract myself from the weight on the bar and stuff like that, and of course then it would be this cycle of, like, you know, get really animated and out of hand, and then the lift goes well. So I was like, oh, right, okay, so there's something to this, and you keep doing that.
It's a positive feedback loop.
Right, exactly. And you know, you look at this, the Yerkes Dodson, the inverted U kind of performance arousal curve, and just like, okay, so there's at least some theoretical underpinning whereby, like, for me, when I get really animated, my performance seems to increase, you know. For someone else to try to do that, it doesn't suit them. Everyone's got their own kind of individual zone of optimal performance, and it is a bit theoretical, and you know, it's hard to properly underpin it. But just for me, I found that that's where I performed best, was when I shouted, got animated, literally tried to convince myself I'm the Wolverine, and I would do the things with the sideburns, and then, you know, get the wax and put the hair up. But I know it's ridiculous. I am insane, but
it works.
It did. And then that kind of brings us to the present day. hadn't really been focusing on powerlifting too much of late because the sport doesn't exist at the moment in Ireland.
That's true. That's
Um,
true. It's funny. You
yeah,
can tell you've done. Is it 150 episodes of the No Lift podcast you've done at this point? Is it close to that?
I've certainly recorded 150.
About
Yeah,
150.
yeah.
Because I had about 10 questions, and I asked you one of them, and I now have maybe 2 questions left. You just covered them all by yourself. You can tell you've done this
Well,
before.
I said at the start how extensive you wanted to be here, so it's your own fault.
It was fantastic. No, I really enjoyed it. The quick question I have before I moved
Yeah.
on to the next one is the City Gym meet. Was that in April of 2017, the first one? Or was there one before that?
I think it was in. Oh, yes. So it would have been late February 2017 because I know then we had another one then in April, the intervarsities. Or the university comps.
Okay.
Intervarsities is IDFPA lingo.
Oh, so I was actually at that the first City Gym camp in February, coaching on the day, and I had no idea. This is my first time hearing that was the first City Gym meet. I don't know why I thought there had been City Gym meets before. It was great. I would not have guessed that was the first meet at all. You wouldn't have been able to tell.
Yeah, and I mean, like I was saying, the 2016 Nationals in UL, I'd like to think I learned a few things along the way with that.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about City Gym is that, like, how often have you gone to a meet that's in like a community hall or some big venue that's just completely inappropriate and it completely dilutes the atmosphere and the sound just gets drowned out. And like sometimes I've been at them and Jesus Christ, like the person on the microphone, it's like it's dead as a nail in here. But the thing about City Gym, because it's in inverted commas too small, it's like Thomond Park because you're on top of the lifter, and you generate this atmosphere just by virtue of it being so small and like with the low ceiling and everything. And it's why it's actually a really special place to hold a competition. It's actually it's an ambition of mine to compete there one day if I can, because like that whole weekend, I don't know if you've ever seen me, but I'm not that fun to be around because I'm so stressed just trying to keep the show on the road. And like you will keep yourself very busy if all you do is just empty toilets, clean the floors, and empty bins and things like that. So thus far, I haven't really been in a position to be able to compete at a competition. I could do it, but it would be a token sort of gesture, and I don't really want to do that.
You mentioned there a while ago about this was one of the questions that we had was did your athletic pursuits influence your academic choices or your career choices? And you already said yes, they did. But you mentioned it was sports science, right? Sport and exercise science in UL was the undergrad you did. Tell us a little more about that. What was your experience with that, and did it live up to your expectations? And what did you go on to do after that?
So, by and large, yes. I mean, I had been kind of told going in, it's like, look, it's a great course. It's probably the best sport and exercise science or equivalent course in the country, but just don't do it and come out of there thinking that you'll walk straight into a job. So I was fully aware of that going in. I was like, I knew that like this was part of the journey, not the destination. And I mean, it's like every course, it trains you well in certain areas, and there are some deficiencies, definitely, but that's the same with every course. And like it's funny, the department I'm in is PE and sports science, and those two would be always there'd be kind of an over and back there between the two. Like I remember Like one year there was uproar because some of the PE students, they got hoodies that said PESS, so like physical education and sports science. So the hoodies say PESS, physical education, something something. So it was always this aggro between the two. But the weird thing is that like the PE teachers could definitely learn a thing or two from a sitting down and having a chat with the sports scientists. But the sports scientists could most definitely learn a thing or two from sitting down and having a chat with the PE students, because they most definitely outclassed us when it came to like communication skills and these kind of things and all this sort of stuff that I probably wish I paid more heed of, particularly with how socially challenged I am. Um, when it came to some of the coaching stuff, because I think that would have stood to me a lot better. I mean, like you can read research papers till you're blue in the face and know so much about what there is to know about training, nutrition, or whatever. But if you can't communicate it properly, if you can't have a fucking conversation with someone, you're not going to do well, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Don't know where I was going with that, but anyway. Oh, sorry, yeah, sports science. So yeah, like, what do you want to know about it? Is this thinking of someone who might be considering pursuing it, or
I suppose that it just, as someone who got into it, you know, I assume that you got into it with the intent of kind of like maybe furthering your athletic pursuits by virtue of knowing all this kind of, would I be kind of off the mark there?
it's a bit of a stretch to think of bodybuilding, which is what I got into it for, as an athletic pursuit. And I don't mean that, I don't really mean that tongue in cheek. You know, it's like it's you're talking about hypertrophy and fat loss effectively.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not the same as like studying. I don't know, like virtually anything to do with any other pursuit,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sporting wise. But yeah, that was definitely what I was hoping to gain out of it. So every time I was sat in a lecture, I was listening or viewing the content through the. I used to say I'm viewing this through bodybuilding glasses, or I'm listening to this through bodybuilding earphones. I was very selfish about it. I was like, all right, how could this content be applied to what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
And like that was obviously an effective strategy for me again, because I got a good degree at the end of it. I got a 1-1 out of it, and obviously then, you know, the lecturers that I approached about doing the PhD then down the line, like they obviously thought so too, because like they took me on as a student, and that's without having a master's degree as well, which usually would be a prerequisite. So yeah.
Yeah, I suppose what I was really looking for was kind of just the story, the lead on to the PhD, your experience with the PhD, and things like that. What did you do a PhD in? Even, and I introed you incorrectly. It should have been Dr. Arthur Lynch. My apologies.
Daniel Lennon has been having a lot of fun with this recently.
I've
So
seen
he's
a
actually,
few different memes. All right.
yeah, like oil to massage my ego and what have you. He's changed the bio on the Sigma website to Dr. Arthur Lynch, comma PhD. So you get it in there twice, which is great fun. I love Danny. But okay, so maybe I'll talk about how I got into it, because it's an interesting story, or maybe not.
We'll see.
We'll see. So in my final year of sports science, I thought, right, okay, I'm not comfortable with where my level of knowledge is at, and that was what it stemmed from, was like I'm not comfortable with where I'm at with this. And even looking back, it's I'm so relieved I pursued it, because you would not believe some of the nonsense I've fallen for over the years. Like the story about the HIIT training was one, but just like it really pissed me off how I fell for such nonsense, and just my critical thinking skills were just so poor. They were non-existent, basically. And even just to the point of like, okay, this thing is a published research study, so I should just believe it. It's like, no, like that study could be a heap of shit, but I wasn't at the point where I could properly critique a study, even, you know. So I was like, right, I'm just not happy with where I'm at, knowledge-wise, critical thinking skills-wise. So I want to pursue a postgrad. There was also an agreement that, like, no, actually, I won't go there. But I was going to say that I was kind of going to be paying my own way once I finish my undergrad, but I don't want to negatively implicate my parents, because they've fully supported me 100% the whole way, and it would be unfair to do that. And in fact, they actually did have to support me the last year of the PhD. But anyway, so I was like, okay, I don't have money to pay for either a PhD or a master's degree. So that was what kind of led me to just reach out to some of the lecturers in UL and be like, hey, you know, I'm interested in doing a PhD. Have you any projects in the pipeline? And, you know, any, like, are they funded, basically? Because I wouldn't have been in a position to do a PhD if there wasn't funding there. And as my supervisor would say to you, if you want to do a PhD, you need a project, you need a supervisor, and you need funding. So that led me to one individual who said, yeah, we're taking on students for a project next year. We're going to be looking at physical activity and health. I won't bore you with the details, because eventually we applied for funding for the project, didn't get it, and then it was kind of like I was kind of getting lukewarm responses from the guy after that. So I was like, all right, that's dead in the water. Meanwhile, City Gym comes along at the same time. So that was around the same time when I started in City Gym. And so I spent that year of, you know, 2014 to summer of 2015 as just being a freelance personal trainer, going between UL Arena and City Gym most days on my bicycle, coaching and training. And well, a lot of the time in City Gym, and anyone who's been there for an appreciable amount of time will know, like a lot of the time you're just hanging out there, just shooting the shit with Gar, or some of the other coaches that were there at the time, but mostly Gar. And then a few months later, a guy shared a post with me from Twitter that was from my old physiology lecturer, advertising 2 PhD positions that they were taking on for the next academic year. So I followed up with them and I said, what's the deal here? And he said, come on in and we'll have a chat. We met, we talked about the project, and I was like, okay, I'm interested. We did the application, it was successful, and I got in. The problem is that they were very keen on me as a student, and I was very keen on a PhD. The problem is that the project itself was on a fairly tenuous sort of link. So it was going to be investigating omega-3 fish oil supplementation in young, healthy, resistance training individuals, to seeing if it could augment the adaptations to training. And in simple language, that's if you take fish oils and you train, will you have more hypertrophy at the end of it compared to if you didn't take the fish oils? Does that make sense?
Yep, totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was based on 2 acute studies. One of them was in older adults, where they found an improved muscle protein synthetic response to amino acid ingestion when they were supplemented with fish oils for 12 weeks before that. And if you know anything about muscle physiology and older adults, I'm sure everyone's well up in this, right? What else do people spend their time doing? But one of the things is, you might have heard of this term anabolic resistance.
Yeah.
So what that basically means is, say if someone like you or I take a 20-gram dose of protein, you'll see an elevation in muscle protein synthesis. And if you give that same dose to an older adult, they will see an increase in muscle protein synthesis, but there is this blunting of the response. So the response won't be as profound as it would be in a young individual. So the fish oil supplementation appeared to be acting on that and sort of was recovering some of that anabolic resistance. So that's great. But the problem was that wasn't my target population. So that didn't really carry over to young individuals, because it's like, well, if there's nothing attenuated, or there's nothing that's blunted, well, then you're not recovering anything. So you would have to surmise that the fish oil would have to be like having an effect over and above the normal healthy response to training. So I was lukewarm about whether or not that would have any effect whatsoever. And about 8 months in, there was a study published that was basically along the lines of what we were trying to do, and found nothing. So at that point, we were just like, "Nah, lads, this is dead in the water." So so then my supervisor said to me, like, "Right, if not fish oils, then what else?" And I don't know if it was I just wanted to sound like I had an answer, or what, or it might have been something I'd read before going into that meeting. But I said, "What about HMB?" And I don't know if you guys are familiar with HMB. It's a metabolite of leucine. And the problem with HMB, or I suppose why I was always uneasy about it, is because it has a very fairly tainted recent history. So there was a couple of studies that came out in 2013 and 2014, basically showing like steroid-like effects from HMB, from this guy Jacob Wilson, and there was at least one letter to the editor of the journal in which one of those papers was published, basically saying these are some fairly extraordinary claims. We're very skeptical of this. And it had like, oh my God, the list of authors on that letter to the editor, it was like a list of who's who in sports nutrition.
I think I definitely remember Lane Norton complaining about this, or talking about this.
Yeah. So funnily enough, do you remember they used to have a show called Muscle College Radio?
I definitely, yeah.
It was a really good podcast, but then that disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically why. It's because of this shady HMB stuff. And I'm not sure if Wilson kind of told Lane and said, "Hey, look, you want in on this?" Or if it was a case of like Lane found out on his own or something, but he wasn't comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
So he pulled the plug in that whole relationship.
As Lane does.
As Lane does, yeah. They said it was done. And so I was always kind of uneasy about that, because like, even when you'd say to someone who was aware of that, oh yeah, I'm studying HMB, there was sort of an eyebrow raised with it. Not only that, but another group that were, some of these HMB skeptics conducted some studies that were trying to replicate the work of Wilson, because again, they were just like, this doesn't add up, so we're going to replicate those studies and see what happens. Shockingly, they didn't find the same results. So that sort of refuted what Wilson was, what Wilson had published. But the other thing was, it wasn't good news for me, because it showed, well, HMB is not going to do anything, and these guys have already done those kind of studies. So it's very hard, because this is the thing when you're doing a PhD, you're always looking for like, what's your novel contribution to the knowledge base. So this was a source of great frustration for me, and the relationship with my supervisor sort of broke down around that time, and like it was a very amicable split. I'm actually starting working on a new project with him actually next month, but we just felt that for both of us it was just best if we just parted ways. So we did. So I formed a new supervisory team with my original co-supervisor, who became my main supervisor, and 2 other supervisors. And for a while we were thinking of keeping up the HMB project. I had actually sourced some HMB, like there was a 10-kilo bag of HMB sitting in my spare room for about a year, which is just the most hilarious story ever. And wondering how to get that into capsules was like the next thing. But I wasn't gone on the HMB stuff, so I just like, the motivation wasn't there. And as my supervisor said to me, like, if the motivation to do this isn't there now, it's not going to be there when you're a few months into data collection and you fucking hate yourself and it's early mornings and it feels like there's no end in sight. Like, that motivation has to be there from the get-go to carry you through. And he was right. But something I had been doing as a bit of a side project at that time was looking at isometric squat testing. Because it was curious to me how, like, so we either do a 1 rep max test, say like a squat or something, and there's concerns around that. And there's also like, imagine if I said to you, Adam, will you enroll in this study for me? It's like, cool, what's involved? Well, we're going to test your squat max, and then we're going to test it again a week later, and we're going to put you through this training program and then retest at the end of it. Like, you'd be kind of like, I think I'll pass, man. I'm all right.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other side of the strength testing continuum, if you like, you have something like an isokinetic dynamometer, which is basically like a seated leg extension where you can fix either the speed of the contraction or you can do it isometrically at a particular joint angle. It's a fantastic tool, but the external validity of it is limited, unless if you're, you know, testing like an injured athlete and you want to see where their strength is at, that kind of thing. Or for non-performance based paradigms, it's very useful. But for what I was interested in, it didn't quite have the characteristics I wanted. The isometric squat seemed like a happy medium between the two, because the biomechanics are similar to a back squat, but you still have a lot of the measurement control and that's afforded by the dynamometer. And then just by chance, I happened to do a reliability study on it because a colleague of mine was using it for his PhD and he had no reliability study on it. So that's basically to tell like how variable is the data that you get from it. If you test it today and you come back in a few days and you test it again, what's the day-to-day variability that's associated with it? So I said, right, I'll do that study for you. So I already kind of had that in the bank. And then around the time that the HMB stuff was falling apart, I was getting more interested in the isometric squat stuff. So we basically halfway through the PhD changed the direction again and then went down this route of the isometric squat testing thing. So it wasn't like that this was like some passion I've had for many years and I'm just really fascinated with isometrics, you know. No, it wasn't that. It was just sort of happened by chance. So the next study then, I don't know, do you want me to go through this? Because this will probably...
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. I'm loving this.
Okay. So, such a nerd, but like, so the principles of...
You're among friends.
Principles of measurement evaluation. So if you think of these, so you've got like, you know, your specificity, your reliability, your sensitivity, objectivity, subjectivity. I was interested in measurement sensitivity. And basically what I mean by this is like, so if we use this isometric squat thing, we test you on that. We get your peak force. We give you a training program. And at the end of it, we retest your peak force. Is the measurement actually sensitive enough to detect a change in strength? Because that was one of the concerns as well with the dynamometer, for example, is because it's a very reliable measure, but it's not particularly sensitive to a general training program. So this is where like some of these theoretical conversations around like specificity versus generality of training, and this all kind of applied here. So it's like how general is the adaptation that the isometric squat can detect it. So to do that, I did exactly as I described. You know, I tested recreationally trained subjects on the isometric squat and the 1RM back squat, gave them a 6-week training program, and then retested those. Interestingly, the isometric squat was, broadly speaking, it was sensitive enough to detect an increase in strength, and the increase was similar to what you'd see in the 1RM. But the problem is that across the group, it was very variable. So some guys were like increasing a shitload, and some were increasing very little. And compared to the 1RM, which was much more, a much tighter mean response, or a much tighter variability, a more homogeneous response, whereas the isometric squat was more heterogeneous. So I was like, all right, well that's interesting. That's a useful finding there. And then at this point, I was at a bit of a crossroads, and I remember having a particular PhD meeting where I gave a sort of a presentation to my supervisors about where I'm at with the thing and where I think we should go next. At that point, something that had interested me was, so you'd be familiar with like sticking points, obviously, powerlifters. What a stupid thing to say. But what interested me was training to specifically improve your strength in around your sticking point. Because I mean, if you think about it, your 1RM squat is not limited by how much you can lift at the end range. So of course, this is why people in commercial gyms will do quarter squats, because they can lift more weight than if they were to go all the way down. It's limited by and large. It's limited by how much strength you have in the sticking point or the sticking region. Depending on where you read, there might be a little bit of, it might be seen as more of a range than a point, but that's actually a contentious issue in the literature. But anyway, so I had this thought in my head of like, well, if we did some isometric training in around the sticking point, and we could see an increase in someone's strength measured through the isometric squat in that position, would that carry over then to more weight on the bar? And I'm not talking about doing something retarded by like, one group does exclusively squatting isometrically in that position and the other group does regular back squats. Like, that's not what I was talking about. What I was talking about would be, say, if you had, let's say you have two groups, one group does, say, 6 sets of squats, the other group does 3 sets of regular squats plus 3 sets of isometric squats in around that sticking point. That kind of idea. That wouldn't be a perfect design, but that would be, broadly speaking, what you'd be trying to compare. So that's what I wanted to do. And I pitched that to my supervisors. They were like, no, to do that, like, you'd need to get this many subjects to get statistical power, and they just weren't gone on it. What they were interested in was, and I was interested in this too, but just not to the same degree, was, so one of my early observations with the isometric squat, because it's performed on top of 2 platforms, is that you can measure how much force you're producing on the left and right leg. So you can calculate how asymmetrical someone is. So I think when I measured mine, I had about a 10% difference between my legs, which wasn't a surprise to me. I've always been stronger off my left leg. But it was interesting. So I was like, you know, so you hear all this kind of thing kind of anecdotally around like imbalances and asymmetries, and, you know, something that I had sort of seen in a few places. And it's funny, our boy was at it again this week, as I know you're a big fan of Squat University.
Absolutely.
Some of the the exercises that he was prescribing to fix imbalances. One of them being like Bulgarian split squats, and it's like, that's an interesting theory, but I'm not actually aware of any data showing that is the case. That like if you train with Bulgarian split squats, and let me just qualify what I'm saying here. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do them, and I'm not saying that they're a perfectly legitimate exercise to do to train your legs and to, you know, as part of an overall training program. But to do them for the purpose of correcting imbalances between legs, I was just like, that's a very interesting theory, but I don't know if it's ever been shown. So from my sensitivity study, the one that I talked about before, I already had the asymmetry response to a bilateral training program, because subjects in that study did back squats and deadlifts. So I knew at that point what was the asymmetry response to a bilateral training program. So I said, in the next study, I'll compare that to a unilateral training program. So it gave subjects Bulgarian split squats and single leg RDLs, which aren't, like, you could argue that the Bulgarian split squat it's a bilateral asymmetrical movement rather than being a purely unilateral movement. But it's about 85% of the contributions coming from the front leg and 15% from the rear. So it's pretty good. Or it's pretty close to like a unilateral movement. And so then got those subjects to do a 6-week training program, and then retested the 1RM and the isometric squat at the end of it. Before I go any further, am I still making sense here? Have
Absolutely.
I lost you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So
I think I detected a hint of sarcasm there from Connor, but
no.
No, that's fine, because just call me in this, because I know this very well in my head, but it doesn't mean I can explain it very well. So we're measuring the asymmetries on the isometric squat. We know what the response is to a bilateral training program, and then we give the other group then the unilateral training program to see what the response is there. Long story short, it's a fucking minefield. Like the percent asymmetry goes every which way.
Okay.
The only time you could get anything that resembled some sort of a clear pattern was if you used a cutoff. So let's say, for example, and this is coming back to the reliability thing. So like day to day, and even like, I'll get into this a little more later on, but like even within the same session, there's a lot of variability in this asymmetry response. But using the peak force, so using the contraction that gave us the highest force output, and then we compare the left and right leg, and we look at the asymmetry. Those who presented with 10% or more asymmetry, so 10% or more difference between legs at baseline, and were given the bilateral training program, we saw a significant reduction in their asymmetry. The unilateral group, it depended on the position you tested it at. So when we did it at a 120-degree knee angle, which would be akin to like a quarter squat, no change. but when we tested it at a 90-degree knee angle, there was a reduction. Now, the two issues there is that when you use that cutoff of 10%, you reduce the sample size down quite a bit. So, for example, in the first group where they did bilateral training, what was a group of 18 became a group of 7. And in the unilateral training group, what was a group of 13 became a group of 5. And you can't draw any confident conclusions about a sample size of 5. You just can't. And then the other thing was this position-specific response. So it's like, depending on the position you test this asymmetry at, you can get a different result. So like anyone who can conclude from that and say, right, you can train to reduce your asymmetry and think like say that confidently is talking out of their backside.
Did you look at whether that is to have any, even to correct these asymmetries, would that even have any measurable impact on, let's just take a back squat as an outcome?
We did, because we had that data there, because we tested their 1RM. And don't forget, we also have the peak force as well. So if you think theoretically, right, let's say you had an asymmetry, 10% difference between the legs. And if we reduce that, what happens to the peak force? There was no there was no significant relationship there at all.
You love to see it.
You do love to see it.
Nothing. Yeah. So
hilarious.
You can do unilateral training if you want, but don't do it for the purpose of correcting quote unquote imbalances. It just it doesn't.
My bias is well and truly confirmed. Love it.
Right. Yeah.
This is why we brought you on, Earth.
And like you'll have to stop me at some point, because I'll go down some rabbit holes that are just not a good idea. But like the whole thing about asymmetries is that whole field is a fucking minefield, man, because it's so specific to the test you use. So I mean, you'll get a different, like for instance, right, if you take the isometric mid-thigh pull, if you perform that on 2 legs and you calculate the asymmetry versus if you perform it on 1 leg and then on the other leg and then combine the two together, you get a different percent asymmetry. If you test an isometric squat, you'll get a different asymmetry compared to like a counter movement jump, or even within the isometric squat, depending on what variable you're looking at, you could get one figure for your asymmetry on your peak force and then another figure for your asymmetry on your rate of force development. It's just the whole thing is just so variable that to be able to draw any kind of confident conclusions about it, it's very, very difficult.
So what you're saying, Arthur, is that the people on Instagram who draw these very confident conclusions are wrong, or might be wrong.
I mean, I'm not that. I'm genuinely, lads. I'm a very average intelligence, and if you know me long enough, you'll know that is the truth. But I just don't see it. I don't know where it's coming from.
I think it's like you talked about critical thinking earlier. It's kind of the skill. It's something you kind of have to flex and build, and a lot of the specific issues come from. I read a book recently, The Irrational Ape. Fantastic book, but it was my first exposure to the concept of converse error. And I just see it everywhere now. I walk around and I'm seeing it wherever I go. So like this thing of like, you know, Bulgarian split squats, you recommending Bulgarian split squats to fix the imbalance. It's like, well, I mean, I'm not balanced when I'm doing Bulgarian split squats. So there's, you know, I'm working on balance and I have an imbalance. So put those two things together and the conclusion is I'm fixing my imbalance. And I think a lot of people fall victim to that. I think a lot of people could do it just being aware of things like that.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate the point. because someone out there is probably going to take this and say, ah,
Never
fuck,
do.
Archer said don't do Bulgarian split squats. Like, they're a fucking dumb exercise. If you see someone in the gym doing that, he's a fucking idiot. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you are doing something like a Bulgarian split squat or any other movement, I think on his list he had fucking Turkish get-ups. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know
Jesus.
why you would do a Turkish get-up, but anyway, that's beside the point. But if you're doing something like a Bulgarian split squat in the hope of fixing your quote-unquote imbalances, that is a very flawed logic. And the evidence that I have read, based on what's published in the literature, wouldn't seem to support that premise. They're perfectly fine exercises to do. There's actually one study that showed similar increases in one arm back squat strength when subjects were only did Bulgarian split squats compared to those who just did regular back squats. Now their one RM is around 150 or so. So I mean, I wouldn't be getting too excited over that. But I mean, it shows it's a very good exercise to strengthen your legs, absolutely. But fixing imbalances, I'm just not sure.
I have the list actually in front of me, and this post is a minefield. Never mind the study of imbalances. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Could I turn things back on you guys for a moment?
Sure.
So something that I've been thinking about recently is like, for example, a client of mine, they'd been dealing with some issues with their knees, and they said, look, almost like they felt guilty telling me, it's like, I actually found some of the stuff Squat U was saying to be very, very helpful. So like at that point, I'm just like, right, like you have to not make the client feel like, you don't want them to feel stupid or something like that. You don't want them to feel bad about it. And the other thing, you don't want to create this scenario of like where they feel like they're a bold school child telling their parent or their teacher about something, or they're even worse, they're not telling them because they're afraid, oh, I'll get in trouble. No, it's two adults with this like common goal of like making the client better. So I was like, right, I'll just be completely open here and just like, right, well, what were some of the things that he was advocating that you found helpful? And what it kind of boiled down to was like, well, when he performed an isometric wall sit before his training, he found that alleviated his pain enough to go and train. So rather than just kind of pointing the finger and be like, well, no, you shouldn't be looking at Squat University, all that stuff is dumb, uh, go somewhere else for your information. I mean, I was kind of just like, man, that's like, if you're finding that helpful and it's allowing you to train, there's no reason for me to say that you should stop doing that. And again, like, this is something that talking about critical thinking, and I mean, I mentioned communication earlier on, but like, what would be your guys' thoughts on that now? Would you have a different approach, or what do you think? Because I'm sure you've come across a client that has, they've watched Squat University or some other guru, and then they've done something by them, and then they come back to you, and it's what would you do there?
So like, I'll speak for myself first, and then Connor, if you want to jump in and add your own 2 cents, because obviously we would maybe differ in approach, but like the driving force behind at least how I coach is always empathy. So I'm always looking to empathize and be empathetic in every possible interaction, So long story short, I would 100% be supportive of them doing whatever they found helpful within reason. Obviously, I'm here to kind of make sure they're not doing anything silly as well, But yeah, I think what I would communicate to them is like, look, if this makes the process of training more manageable to you, then amazing. That's fantastic. But it doesn't necessarily validate anything that validate anything that he's saying in terms of making these huge broad recommendations to everyone about doing something. If something works specifically well for you in terms of improving or reducing the pain you feel, or just improving your pain experience, which is obviously this massively complicated thing. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll talk about this a different time, because I feel like this could be another 2 hour
Yeah,
segment. But yeah, like I suppose I communicate like, look, this is your experience. If this is improving your experience, then amazing. But I wouldn't necessarily take this and tell other people, because that's oftentimes what will happen. Someone will do an exercise, they'll feel amazing, and they'll tell their friend they're training with, man, you have to do this exercise before. Like, I've done that. I think everyone has done that.
mm,
So that would be my approach. I'd be okay with it, as long as it's helping them. And yeah, Connor, what do you think?
I think the same. Like, look, within reason, if it's, I'd be happy that the person is finding some relief and that is able and confident to train. I think that the ultimate thing to avoid when somebody is having a pain experience is fear of movement or fear of what quote unquote hurt them.
yeah,
If you had some sort of pain experience squatting, I want you to stay squatting to some degree, because if you take time away from it and let this ruminate and let you kind of catastrophize about squatting, that will only set you back in the long term. I mean, if it's something as benign as a wall sit, I don't care who said it. Like, if it's giving you the confidence to train and you're, and we have
yeah,
this conversation, and as you said, not treating them like a child,
Mm-hmm.
maintaining and preserving
yeah,
this relationship of trust as much as possible. I'd say I'm delighted that you're comfortable and happy to train, and guide them along the process, letting them know that, look, it's not this master key, or there's no one tool that is guaranteed to fix
wonder
any pain
trick.
experience or any issue, but to say, look, we're working through this, and to get a kind of a, we've talked about this in the past, Adam, is opening the conversation about pain, and it's way easier when they're actually able to move and train.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if Adam's knees are killing him and he can't walk, he can't go anywhere, and I start saying, well, pain is all in the brain, he's going to tell me to get fucked. You know.
Mm,
But
Actual events.
yeah,
yeah, but yeah, no, I wouldn't discredit, or I wouldn't. I do discredit Squat University on a daily
yeah.
basis.
But see, that's the problem. Is that like, so something I've been thinking about recently is like, and one of these aspects of kind of critical thinking that I want to get better at is like, not just defaulting to like, oh, that's bollocks, or oh, that makes sense because of the source,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah,
rather just getting better at like critiquing it for what it is. So a good example would be like, um, so I sort of see sort of a red flag when I see growth mindset brought up, and then I'm like to myself, oh, growth mindset bullshit. And then I think about it a bit more. I'm like, well, why do I believe that? And it's because my mates who are sports psychologists, and I trust their opinion. They've told me it's bollocks. I haven't actually taken the time out to go and read the literature on that area.
Mm-hmm.
Now it may very well be that that's the case, but just getting better at like critiquing the evidence, not believing it or dismissing it because of who says what. Do you know what I'm getting at?
kind of
100%. Yeah.
treating it on a more contextual basis. Nearly, am I right in saying that?
Yeah. So, like with the Squat University thing, it's very easy to look at that and be like, for fuck's sake, he's like, I think I've seen this thing before where he has like 15 different warm up exercises, like your fucking shopping list before you start training. It's like 40 minutes in, you've done nothing. And so it's very easy to see all that sort of stuff, or the thing about the imbalances, and then just be like, this guy's a fucking knob. Why, like, but then, like, on some level, it's like someone's finding bits of this helpful. So just kind of reconciling that
Mm-hmm.
is something that I'm kind of, I'm conflicted about at times. I don't really know,
Hmm.
so that's why I asked the question to you guys.
I know the exact conflict you're talking about. I think the problem is when people um they'll like feel a perceived benefit from something that someone said, and then continue on as if that is fact, you know. And I hate to think that that's the majority, how the majority go about their lives, but it feels like that's how the majority go about their lives. And the reason I say that is because, these pages like Squat University has, 500,000 followers, and a
More
lot of,
than a million, I think.
Yeah.
oh really, there you go. So yeah, that would be kind of the source of that conflict for me. I think it's about that. Like, that's why I say, because especially as a coach, like, I'm not an expert in anything. I am, like you said, a coach athlete relationship, or just a coach client relationship, is two adults coming together with the same goal in mind. Whatever that goal may be.
Mm.
And that's why I think, like, at Odyssey Strength, I would call our coaching empathy driven, because that is literally the essence behind every single interaction. Like, if they find something beneficial, great. Educating them on, like, critical thinking and things like that might not be what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
So it is tough, and it is heavily conflicting to operate within that sphere, and have these opinions, and maybe have practiced and built up the skill to critically think to an extent, to hugely varying degrees, but not be able to necessarily, like, impart that skill on other people. It is difficult. It is conflicting. What do you think? What would be your what? Oh, I mean, you did actually already explain what you would do about it, but what do you think about that whole uh, larger conflict? Do you think there's any way of combating it?
Which aspect of it specifically?
Just, I suppose, the whole, like, Instagram thing. Like,
Yeah.
there being
Uh,
these pages with millions of followers, where that are this information is permeating through fitness as fact. And it's not necessarily like the split squat thing you said.
yeah.
How do you
So
combat that?
yeah. So I don't have a good answer, but I'll give you my thoughts
Yes.
in that, like, so getting back to what I was saying before about, like, why I wanted to do a PhD was because I was appalled by my critical thinking skills, thinking of some of the stuff I had fallen for, and just I was like, this is not good. I'm not equipped for life, because I'm just going to fall for more bullshit. Um, Interestingly, shameless plug, I did an excellent interview for the No Lift podcast with a bullshit researcher there last week. It was fantastic. He's a cognitive psychologist, and one of his areas of research is in bullshitting. It was terrific. Anyway, shameless plug aside, you can edit that out if you like. But of course, then I forget what I was actually about to say. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So right. So I had this in my head of, like, I want to do a PhD to improve my overall critical thinking, among other things, because I wasn't happy with where that was at. I was actually less concerned with, like, what I actually specialize in. It was just the process of going through it that was more so what appealed to me, and just, like, exposing myself to that higher level of intellect.
Mm-hmm.
So I've gone through that, and I've come out the other side, and I'm better equipped to look at stuff like that and say that, okay, like, I can see the flaws in that argument. Well, we know that there's this literature here that directly refutes what you're saying. That claim you've made, there's no evidence there to substantiate that. Or something I've seen recently as well, which is fucking pissing me off big time, which is, like, you see someone make some ludicrous claim, and they'll just try to justify it with, like, ooh, studies show that, and then it's like, author citation, like, what studies, but they know that the vast majority of people aren't going to look for a reference list, so they're fine. They just say shit like that really takes me off. Like, that properly gets me riled up. But I'm in a position now where I'm okay at that. I still fall for nonsense all the time. Okay. So when you put that in the context of someone who's literally spent a decade at a university, to just be okay at it,
Mm-hmm.
and then you realize, okay, well, look, okay, I have some sympathy for the average punter now who, doesn't have that level of education or anywhere near it. Like, of course they're going to fall foul for those sort of things, because I've spent this long, and it really sounds like I'm tooting my own horn here. I don't mean to, but just like when you put in the context of like how long I spent at university, and I'm only okay now at this, and then you realize, well, like, of course they're going to fall for stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally. To pull us back, that was all fantastic. To pull us back, so you get your PhD. Was it, life-changing to receive that piece of paper? What was that like?
Actually, so,
yeah.
You become Dr. Arthur Lynch, PhD.
Yeah. So it's funny, right? The pandemic hit at, like, for me, it was unfortunate because it actually happened towards the end of my final study. So I actually lost about 7 participants, but it was also in another sense a blessing in disguise, because it meant I was stuck at home, couldn't leave. So it was like ideal conditions for someone who needs to spend 6 months at a computer to write their thesis. And so I got that done, got it submitted, and I was like, I felt so fortunate that I was in that position where it happened at that time, whereby it affected me to a much lesser degree than, say, if it had happened 18 months prior to that. That was curtains for me with the PhD, definitely, because of where I was at with it. Like, I glossed over a few of the details there, but like around the time when I had that split with my supervisor, I had to sit in front of a research confirmation panel, and basically they were just kind of grilling me and being like, listen, you've been here 2 years, you've nothing to show for it. What the fuck? So I had to plead my case there, and then spend the next 6 months basically kind of like a probation period, where I had to prove to them that, like, it was worthwhile granting me the passage to continue on with my studies. So the plug could have been pulled at that point. And if the pandemic had hit then, definitely would have, because I wouldn't have been able to conduct my studies. And my area of research, it wasn't really much scope for doing like a survey or something like that, So anyway, yeah, so get the thesis in, get it submitted. And I was like, geez, I got off lightly here with the pandemic, because I was able to do this, do the oral examination over Zoom, and then it's like all this build up, and then I do it, and it's like, right, so yeah, we're going to award you the PhD, congratulations, and then it's like, sign off on the call. I'm just like, there's no one else here. I can't go, like, I don't go out, like, I don't drink or anything, so I wouldn't be like heading to the pub or anything like that afterwards, but it was just a really weird anticlimax. And then, of course, there's another thing as well, is that once you finish your Viva, and which is the oral examination, you have corrections to make to your thesis, and they actually took quite a long time. So it was even dragging it out a bit more. So it makes it even more anticlimactic. I mean, I'm fine with not having the graduation ceremony. I like the thought of being up at the top of the concert hall with the funny looking hat and basically a dress on me. I'm cool with not having to go through that. But yeah, it was a huge anticlimax, I must admit.
I expected it might be. Well, I hadn't even factored in the pandemic part of it, but I just can't imagine that going through, especially the way you tell the story. You went through all of these kind of setbacks, to finally get this thing done and have it.
Like, I might just clarify something as well. Like, maybe in the way I've told it, it sounds like, geez, this guy is some man for overcoming adversity. It was all self-inflicted. Like, okay. Like, I spent so much time procrastinating and arsing around and being on my phone and fucking just any kind of way to waste time. I found it. At times, powerlifting was a great source of distraction for me, and just nonsense stuff I did over the years, just wasting time needlessly. So yeah, it was all self inflicted. It wasn't that God, they just keep lining him up and he just keeps knocking him over. It was no. It was like I found myself in the shitter and I just managed to pull myself out of it. And that was it. Like,
so
Can
before I ask,
was
sorry, go
there?
on, Connor.
I suppose this is connected to what we were just talking about. Was there an element of, I'm sure we've all met a lot of people who would have a fair degree of imposter syndrome, and they think, oh, once I get this qualification, grand, I know what I'm about now, or once I finish my personal training course, I'll know what I'm about. I can imagine a PhD is like the highest level of it, and you can say, okay, if I have a PhD, I know my shit, I know what I'm about. And then when the time comes and you're still Arthur Lynch, I'm sure there can be a bit of a feeling like, oh, I thought this wave of knowledge and certainty and confidence would come over me, but nothing has changed. Is that, I feel like I'm talking serious smack about the huge achievement that getting a PhD is, so please don't take it that way.
No, I get it. And yeah, that's exactly it. I don't know if I thought at the start of it that I would be like the world's expert in a particular thing. Sometimes when I start talking about my PhD and I'm like, oh, probably I do know, like probably more than most anyway about this topic. But I mean, it's an isometric squat. It's like the overall utility of it is fairly limited. And it was hilarious as well. Like once the pandemic hit, because, for instance, a lot of people still found ways to train. Like they found ways to get like barbells and racks and benches and stuff. Like I was locked out of the university, so like I was like, right, if theoretically, if isometric squats were important for something that you were doing, either you're using them as your outcome measure or you're using them as part of your training, like I was kind of hinting at earlier on, you couldn't do it. So it's like, so it's a very weird situation. It's like I'm in it. I know a lot about a subject that's relatively unimportant, and not very transferable. So yeah, I mean, but I kind of knew going in. It's like expertise. It's knowing more and more about less and less. So it does disappoint me that I'm not better at statistics. I thought that might be one thing I'd be better at. But I'm still terrible at them.
What was the leucine molecule called again? What was that, the controversial one?
HMB. That's the long form name is like beta hydroxy beta methyl butyrate.
Mm-hmm. So I think the burning question everyone is going to have after listening to this is, what happened to the 10-kilo bag of HMB?
Oh yeah. So I held on to it for longer than I probably needed to, because I was like, just in case someone asks what became of it, I'll just hold on to it. And then I actually think like the day I did the oral examination and passed it, I'm chucking that thing in the bin.
I remember
it's like spreading ashes after somebody's died.
Yeah.
There was a while there where I was taking leucine on Lane Norton's advice, and it was gross. Oh my god, it was disgusting. Horrible. So, like, creatine is not very nice. Leucine is just, oh my god, it's absolutely disgusting. I'm glad I stopped taking that stuff. So we have a couple of open-ended questions left, but I fear you probably have a life to get back to outside of this conversation, so we might hold them off for another.
You'd think I would, yeah.
Connor, is there anything else you wanted to ask or chat about or expand on?
Listen, there's so much that we were only talking about this when we were coming through talking points. Like, there is so much that we could really deep dive into. I think we'd be here all day.
Absolutely. So we'll have to have you on again.
I mean, I was going to say I would love to if you'd have me back again, but then I didn't want that to be an awkward like, oh jeez, no,
Oh, we have to do this again.
he wants to come back on again. No.
Amazing. Oh, that was great. That genuinely was like just to sit here and listen. Super interesting and super valuable. I really hope and think there will be at least two of our 4 listeners might find that really valuable.
You guys have 4 listeners,
right?
Wow, that's
my mom, Connor's mom, and yeah, I think we have a friend.
I'm pretty sure my only listener is when I listen back to the podcast I record at the during the week to see how it sounded. But honestly, lads, I was like when I got the message that you wanted me to be on, I was pretty chuffed. So honestly, thank you. I know it seems trivial because like podcasts are everywhere nowadays, but when someone asks me on, I just feel so humble because it's like, oh my god, someone wants to hear me talk for what has it been? Jesus, I've been on way too long, 2 hours. But no, I really, really appreciate it. So thanks so much.
No, we really appreciate you coming on, man. It was really, really enjoyable to chat. Really enjoyable. All right, guys. That is episode... What episode is that?
Oh, man. I haven't a clue.
I don't know.
Is it 11?
11, that's right. That's right. That was episode 11. It was much better than last week's disaster episode. Again, as usual, we'll be back within the next 7 days. If you have any questions or if you'd like us to have anyone on in particular, please let us know. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you again soon.
All the best.